What's up guys, it's the Horror Wombat, and yep, we are now 3 for 3 with this everyone, because our next stop on this tour of twisted childhood horror movies brings us to today's movie, The Little Mermaid. Yep, it's just called The Little Mermaid, not Little Mermaid, Ariel's Revenge, or whatever the you want to call it. Now, I want to go ahead and apologize to Peter Pan's Neverland Nightmare, because I originally said that out of all the public domain fairy tale horror movies, I said that it was by far the worst looking one. Yeah, I've since changed my mind because here comes this Little Mermaid movie to go ahead and just drop a bomb on the Peter Pan horror movie. Yeah, no, this movie looks atrocious, guys. If we're focusing on any movie from this specific genre, I honestly think this might be the worst looking one so far. I mean it. And you might be thinking, oh, you're just being negative. It looks totally fine. You're just being a jerk for the hell of it, you bitch. And I'm like, alright. Well, just you wait, and after looking at the trailer for this movie, I can confidently say that out of all these movies, this takes the cake for the most boring looking one of them all. Yeah, you thought Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey was boring as hell? You ain't seen nothing yet. That being said, I do think this movie does have a somewhat decent plot. It's not completely copying off the original story by Hans Christian Andersen, which honestly, that story alone could make for a great horror movie. If you don't know, in that story, it's basically about how the Little Mermaid goes through this whole process of immense suffering by giving up her voice to become a human, all because she wants to be with a prince. I mean, you've probably heard this story before, but unlike the version you're probably the most familiar with, aka the Disney version, believe it or not, she actually doesn't end up with the prince, and instead she just fucking dies. Yeah, it's hella messed up, and that's something I probably should have brought up in my previous videos about these public domain movies, because those movies are also based on the original stories, and not the Disney ones. I only brought up the Disney versions because those are the versions we most commonly associate these characters with, but yeah, those original stories from like the 1800s are actually pretty up. I mean, have you seen the ending of the original Pinocchio story? I mean, I don't really want to say it because I know YouTube is very sensitive to these kind of topics, but let's just say it involves a noose. That's all you need to know. So what makes this version of The Little Mermaid different is that it follows an archaeologist named Eric Prince, real clever name change, guys, as he and his team unveiled this like artifact that has an incantation on it, and I guess it summons this pretty looking woman who's also secretly an evil mermaid. Eric and this girl meet up, he falls in love with her, but his team finds out that there's something wrong with her. So the only way to end this whole mermaid curse is to sacrifice a human, but Eric lets true love get in the way. Again, I think this idea has potential. However, what we've seen from the trailer, it doesn't look like they're going to expand on this idea whatsoever. And I ultimately think that's going to result in some slow pacing, and thus a boring ass horror movie. Plus, I think the trailer ultimately gives away the entire storyline. So now the movie's basically ruined for me. Yeah, when I was summarizing the plot of this movie just a minute ago, I was essentially just recapping the trailer of this movie for you guys. And I just told you everything that you're probably going to expect from this movie. That's one of the biggest issues I have with these movies. They make these kind of cool plots revolving around these characters, yet in the end they just go absolutely nowhere with them. Like, take a look at Peter Pan's Neverland Nightmare, for instance. Something I forgot to mention is that there's this whole idea that Peter Pan kills kids, and then he takes their souls off to Neverland. Again, that sounds like a cool twist on the original story, but the execution we've seen so far, it just doesn't look promising to me. And remember how I said in the last video how that movie was stealing from other horror movies? Well, unsurprisingly, this movie does the exact same. Not as shamelessly, but it's still pretty blatant. Like, let's take a look at the first few seconds of the trailer. We got a couple of cool wide shots, and bam! Yep, that is deadass Quint from Jaws. So this reveals two different scenarios. One, that would mean that this movie and Jaws are canonically in the same universe. Or two, the filmmakers were just lazy and they couldn't come up with a more creative costume for a fisherman. I'm just gonna go ahead and assume that it's most likely the latter. They also never reveal how the mermaid is able to walk on land, and since we're following a completely different storyline, that probably means that there's not going to be a sea witch involved that takes away the mermaid's voice. And we already know this because she can still talk while on land. So the only realistic situation is that on land she becomes human, and in the water she turns into a monster. I mean, didn't Luca do the same kind of thing a few years ago? Oh, it's also worth noting that the name of the mermaid is Aurora. I guess they didn't want to be completely unoriginal and just name her Ariel, so they just went with a different Disney princess name. Okay, so some of you are probably still thinking, okay, okay, this movie sounds bad, but I'm still not convinced that it's the worst one. Could you please further elaborate, Mr. Horror Wombat? Alright, I got you. One other thing to note is that this movie is not a part of the whole Twisted Childhood universe put together by Reese Frake Waterfield. It's gonna be its own thing pretty much. And while those movies are all independently made with no major distributors behind them, this Little Mermaid movie actually does, because Lionsgate is helping distribute this movie. And with a big name distributor like that, I mean, you'd ultimately think it would be like a better version of these types of movies, right? Well, too bad this thing is still going straight to digital. It was so bad that they decided not to release it in theaters and they just dumped it onto streaming. Even the Winnie the Pooh horror movies got theatrical releases. Now, I want to talk about the guy behind this movie, writer slash director slash editor Leigh Scott. I have no clue who this guy is, so I decided to look him up. So why don't I go ahead and list some of the other movies this guy has made. He's the guy behind such classics as Transmorphers, Piranha Sharks, King of the Lost World, Hillside Cannibals, and the 9/11 Commission Report. Wait, what the hell? There is no way that is an actual real movie. Now, although it might be a bit skeptical for me to take an auteur approach towards this guy's movies, especially considering I haven't seen a single one of them, that's probably going to be irrelevant anyways, given that the average rating on IMDb for all of this guy's movies is a 3.7 out of 10. I guess that's no big surprise when you worked for a company like The Asylum. And for those of you who don't know, The Asylum is an independent movie company that specializes in these types of movies called mockbusters, which is basically just a poor man's version of a big blockbuster movie. They're probably best known for the Sharknado movies, but they've also made plenty of movies that are just cheap ripoffs of other movies or just shittier versions of classic movies. In fact, many of the aforementioned Leigh Scott movies I brought up were Asylum movies. And before doing research on his Little Mermaid horror movie, I actually thought that it was going to be a movie from The Asylum, but nope, it's not. And I think part of the reason why is because The Asylum actually just came out with their own version of The Little Mermaid, but instead it's an animated movie for kids. Although, honestly, that could be a horror movie in its own right given how unsettling the animation is. Seriously, what the fuck am I looking at right now? Are you trying to scar your child audience, Asylum? I mean, props to that, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, overall, I can guarantee you that this Little Mermaid horror movie is going to be a classic for sure. And by that, I mean it's going to be another disaster we can add to this collection of this ever-increasing Twisted Childhood universe. And trust me, this universe is increasing like exponentially. I just learned recently that they're making like 3 more Mickey Mouse horror movies and also a Popeye horror movie. And somebody posted a comment on my last video saying that there's also plans for a Powerpuff Girls horror movie, a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles horror movie, and a Teletubbies horror movie. And if that's actually the case, then I just gotta say, to those who actually enjoy these movies, get ready to be eating good for the next few years. But you know what? I think I'm gonna be taking a little break from talking about these public domain horror movies, because I don't know how much longer my mind can take all of these. And besides, it's Thanksgiving next week. I gotta get you all a special holiday treat ready for you guys next week, so stay tuned for that. But anyways, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and make your way down over to that subscribe button, you know, if you want. But for now, that's about it for today. I'll catch you guys in the next video. See ya.